enjoy tropical Oslo. Well, I thought we'd landed in Miami for a while there. And of course, you saw the array of local people lounging on their pier end of the town and swimming. It was the greatest display of wildlife since I was in the Arctic. But of course, it's kind of a remarkable city just because it has transformed itself with all these new modernist buildings. Some of them a little more interesting than others, but today I'm going to talk about our next port of Skagen, or Skagen, they call it Danish, in Copenhagen. But I think after a week on board, you can appreciate the coordination of this ship and all the people who put the operation together. And I've been on the ship many times, and I'm always impressed how well coordinated it is, along with other Silver Seas. And of course, there are bigger ships that have bigger problems, let's say. But it reminds me of the old story of the officers are getting together and they're saying, who has the most important job on the ship? And they decide, well, the engineer, the captain, the chef, the cruise director, they'll all trade jobs for a day and see how it goes. So they call each other after a while, and they call down to the engine room where the chef is trying to cook on the engines. And he said, these engines are much too hot to cook eggs on. You know, I really don't know what to do. And then they call the captain, who's in the galley, and he says, I don't know how, I can't believe you give these knives to the crew. There's going to be a mutiny, I tell you. And then they call the engineer who's up in the theater. He says, I have no idea how all these wires and lights and action happen. It's just completely confusing to me. And then they call the cruise director up on the bridge. And they say, well, how's the ship doing? Oh, it's fine. Where are we? I have no idea. But it's safe. It's okay. Well, where are we? Well, we've run aground. But the buses are waiting, and the tours are going to happen anyway. But anyway. But I'll show you our places we're going to go here. The country of Denmark is quite remarkable because it's all flat land and sand, pretty much, all these islands, some 408 islands. Of course, we are just coming out of the Oslo fjord tonight, and we're going into what's called the Skagerrak, which actually means the passage past Skagen, Skagen here, right here, the end of the northern tip of what is Jutland, which is the only part of Denmark that's attached to the rest of Europe via Germany here. And of course, then we're going down the Kattegat, or the Catgut, through many passages through the Øresund here to Copenhagen. So this is local waters, but it's also very turbulent because there's a lot of tidal flow coming from the bigger North Sea Atlantic coming into these waters and then through all the islands, and making, in the old days of sail and rowing, a very difficult passage. So we are going up here into the little port of Skagen, and then we'll be coming down to Øresund, and Copenhagen's on the island of Zealand, as in New Zealand. And this is Sweden, but it's very low land. Most of it's agricultural at this point. This is the spit of land that we're going to land on. So this is, I kind of refer to it as the Cape Cod of Denmark, because it's out there at the end of the land, and people go out there mostly for a holiday, and it is a shifting sand dunes. So we'll be coming into the little port in the small town. It's actually a beach resort town. So in the winter, there are very few residents, but a lot of visitors in the summertime. It's sort of a rite of passage if you're Danish to go to that end of the island and see the extent of the land. And on the east side is the harbor. That's where we'll be coming in. And this is the point called the Grennen, or the stick out into the sea. And this is a former royal palace right here, the Kilteklitten. So we'll come in, and they have breakwaters and stuff. The waters can get very rough, so we'll be alongside, probably around in here. I'm not sure where they're going to place the ship here. It depends on the port authorities, of course. But this is a small town. You can walk from one part of it to the other, and you'll see it's very simple and low rise. It's not exactly built up as a resort. They've kept it in a modest way, just because it has a historical value to the Danes. But typically they have red tile roofs and this kind of buff yellow buildings, and all of them are that way with little gardens and neighborhoods. Most people come by train, but this is one of the central plazas. And when you get off the ship, you can either walk to these places or you take the tours, which usually go out to the outer beaches and such. Most people come here just to go to the beach and walk through the town. There are a few shops, but this is not really a commercialized resort. No big hotels or malls or anything like that. So it has a bit of a flavor from about 100 years ago when King Frederick X came and made it his summer home. And some of the churches are a couple hundred years old, Lutheran churches. And a point of note, in Scandinavia, the Lutheran Church serves as the registrar for the population. So the government actually supports the churches to register the people and keep the record. So every town has not just the church, whether they believe in the religion or not, but they go there for their, let's say, civil business. The town was the largest fishing port for Denmark because you could get out into the North Sea quickly. So it had a very large herring catching fleet, and that has now moved to bigger industrial ports, but they still have the old fish houses, which have now turned into shops and restaurants and lodging. There's some historic homes of artists. This is the Ankerhus of Mikael and Anna Ankerhus, who were famous painters, and now they gave their house downtown to the town as a little museum and shop. The oldest building in the neighborhood is this Tilsandede Kirke, which means the church that's been overwhelmed by sand. And this had a medieval village back in the 1500s, but because of the winds and the sand shifting, it covered all of the town except for the church. But back in those days, churches were built like fortresses so they could be defended from competitive Vikings or other invaders. But what happened is that the church doors got completely covered in sand, and even to this day, after a big storm, they have to come and clear it out so you can go inside. And it's slowly but surely sort of sinking and or getting enveloped by the sand dunes up there. Well, this is why people come for that kind of rough coast on the west side, calm waters on the east side, and you get people who lie around like walruses while they are counting the ships go by, because this is a very busy passage. Going around Skagen is the course for all of the shipping that goes not just to Denmark but into the Baltic to go to Poland, and the places we'll go on our next cruise all the way to Finland and Sweden. So there's a constant parade of ships of all sizes going. There's some monuments right there on the point. This is a famous poet in Denmark, Holger Dankman, and he sort of built himself a Viking-like tomb for himself. Other monuments in the area are actually relics of World War I and World War II, when this area was fortified with coastal artillery to keep whoever was not supposed to be there away. Now it is a struggle for recreation. And Denmark in particular is famous for the leading producing of windmills. So they have a policy that if they get there by 2030, they will be fully electrified by wind power and maybe some solar, but they have tremendous winds in various places, and that's what they've been developing. So you see this all the way down on our course back to Copenhagen. And here's one of the tourists washed up on shore, wondering whether his fur is thick enough to prevent a sunburn. Now these are North Sea seals, so they roam the ocean up there. There are also orcas and some whales who come in. But the town got noted in Danish annals because King Frederick wanted to have a place up here, so he and his Queen Alexandra came up and famously brought their yacht up from Copenhagen, which is still, we'll see it in the harbor, and they built their little cottage called Kinderklitten, and that then fell into some disrepair. Now it's become a museum house and then still an artist studio, so they now have built some new artist studios with the right kind of lighting into the rooms to continue what is the tradition of Skagen is painters. And so around the 1880s to 1920s, there was a whole colony there, and there's still people going there, and they bought up the little fishermen's cottages and then made studios. Some of them are turned into house museums. This is in the Hunker House. And I'll just show you some of the paintings of this group. There's a whole list of them. As a summer colony, again, sort of like Cape Cod in the U.S., Massachusetts. And so there are paintings of the interior and a lot of portraits and all this, but more interesting are their landscape, the farmers in the area. And most of Denmark is like this. It's all wheat fields and dairy farms and things like that. And then the royalty and their friends would come on parade, and they're, you know, they don't dress like that on the beach anymore. I sort of miss it. Anyway, then they would have parties for midsummer. So this is tradition all through Scandinavia, a big bonfire in the full moon in May. But the life of this town was originally fishing, so these are the more interesting portraits of the life back then. There's still some, but it's, again, the fishing stocks have faded so much that the ships go much too far to have a local fishery like these fellows launching their boat by brute force. Does that look like anybody you know? Anyway, this is a sort of life of the sea, which people come up here, particularly because the light is very radiant up in this end of the world. Maybe it's just because Skagen is surrounded by sea, so it has a quality of light, particularly even in the moonlight, that is more than you get in the overlit cities and such. So here's one of the old lighthouse ships that would be moored off the point, because the point was full of shipwrecks over time, because in the dark or in a storm you just couldn't see the beach as it came to get you. But it's still rough. On a windy day you can see how it gets whipped up, and so that's pretty brisk and bracing. Of course, we're going to have another tropical day tomorrow, I think, so it'll be kind of easy for us to go out there. I haven't seen the tour list today, but most of them will go out about 10 kilometers out of town to go to the lighthouse and then to the tip of the point of land. So this is well known in Denmark as sort of their end of the world, though it's close to Sweden and close to Norway, of course. So this is the famous Grenen, which means the sandbar, or literally a stick of sand out into the sea. And so it curls out from the dunes and the grasslands out to this point, and then it, depending on the tide, it goes out quite a ways at low tide, and then suddenly the ocean comes taking all of the sand underwater. And so the entertainment there is to go out at high tide and try to get back before low tide. So maybe you'll get to do that today. I recommend good running shoes, because the tide comes in pretty quickly. So there's the view at the end of the world of Denmark. Then we come down to the narrows called Øresund, which is the pinch point of the waterway from the North Sea through these open waters into the Baltic. And this is where a great castle was built, the Kronborg Castle. This edition of it started about 1500s, and then they've fortified it and they put large embankments, and it was still a military base until World War II. But it is best known as the setting for Hamlet. He took this as the isolated castle where the young prince went mad, and he famously said, to live in a castle or not, what is the question? Well, he's remembered there in his little pen of a castle, and it's been under some renovation because it had been bombarded off and on. But this was the key element of the Danish government to collect tolls on all ships that would pass through. So unless they had a treaty of free passage, they had to pay a pretty big tax depending on what the estimation of their cargo. And they had another, at this time, southern Sweden was part of Denmark, so they had on Helsingfors on the other side another castle, so there was no way a ship could get past the cannons unless they paid the great toll. Now in the 1700s, in Germany, Kiel, Germany, they started to dig the Kiel Canal, which then has been expanded to the point where ships will go from Hamburg into the Baltic without having to come around Denmark. And then it was a matter of contention during the Napoleonic Wars, and finally the Danish agreed that it would be open passage, which it is to this day. But meanwhile, the castle remains. I took this picture on our way up, and they're still repairing it. It's quite a magnificent building, but it no longer fires cannons at us. Well, maybe they will. I never know. We have better check ahead before we go. Then we come down to Copenhagen. That's Skagen up there, and then the Kronborg Castle's about there, and then we come to the city of Copenhagen. And you see most of Denmark is other islands, Fyr and Jutland. The German border's right about there. But Copenhagen was right on the point of the Øresund, where it had quick access to Sweden and also had the rest of Denmark to go to. But you can see all these different islands everywhere. It was a very complicated place for anybody to know where they were going without the help of the locals. And this is meant that Denmark sort of had a strategic place in many a conflict over the centuries in Northern Europe. But in prehistory, it is said that the fertility god of Gelfun wanted more land for agriculture, and so she took her sons, turned them into bulls, and had them dig up the lakes of southern Sweden and spread the earth around in the sea to make Denmark. Now this is mythology, but that's perhaps what really happened, is that there was enough erosion after the Ice Age so that a lot of the earth in southern Sweden came down into the shallow seas and made all these islands. This is a statue near the castle in Copenhagen, not far from where we're docking, which is the great origin story of the nation. But as more archaeology is underway, they keep finding more and more early Viking, early prehistoric remains, even Neanderthal and early prehistory settlement in this kind of lush territory of Denmark. And so when the Norse and the Vikings era came, their record was carved into various rocks, and these have the runic letters and then symbology. These are often now in a church. That when Denmark and the rest of Scandinavia was converted to Christianity, they kept the old stones, maybe out of good luck to see which religion would finally prevail, but they keep finding more. These are considered the earliest inscripted stones in Denmark about the clans and the family that controlled the area. They're usually memorial stones, and they keep finding more. This one was recently unearthed, and it has Viking longboats and inscriptions and what they call further in my earlier talk I described some of the alphabetic nature of the language. The problem with this find, though, is guess where it was found? Ontario, Canada. So I don't know how they got all the way over there. But then Denmark converted to Christianity, and this is Harald the Bluetooth, who was the king in the early 900s, who then converted to Christianity after his travels to see the rest of Europe, and then he came back to convert the rest of the Danish population to Christianity. His name goes on in the app invented in Denmark of Bluetooth. We use it all the time. Thank you, King Harold. This was the first map published in Latin, the Carta Maria of this whole area. And this is Zealand, and Copenhagen's about there, Sweden and such. But note they highlighted the Monumental Danavik, which is the Danish work, they call it, to keep the wall and trench system that was set between Schleswig and Holstein to keep the Germanic people from invading the rest of Denmark. So that's now an archaeological site also. And then the Kingdom of Denmark is, let's say, quite proud. It's had one of the longest monarchies in any nation in Europe. And in the 1200s, the Danish navy and king invaded the Baltic area, and they went all the way to Estonia, Finland, and made Danish colonies there briefly. And this is the battle at Danneborg in Estonia, where the Danish flag, the red field and white cross, miraculously came out of the sky to greet the king and the bishop, saying, "This is God's will that Denmark shall rule this part of the world." Well, the Swedes and the Russians and the Finns have all had a different opinion about that. But you go to, next cruise, we're going up to Tallinn, we'll see the site of this battle that was, medieval era, but the Danish flag still is around, and that's the oldest national flag in the world. And by the way, this ship has the flag of the Bahamas and registered in Nassau, but the flag has the Danish flag on it because the Bahamas used to be owned by the Danish crown, and now they have another emblem for being Caribbean, but our own flag on the ship is part Danish. Well, in the roll of history, the British wanted access to the Baltic, mainly for ship supplies, timber, pitch, other things for the Navy. And so in 1801, during the embargo and the naval blockade of France in the Napoleonic Wars, Horatio Nelson brought the British fleet in and demanded open passage into the Baltic. When the Danish refused, then he bombarded and defeated, captured the Danish fleet, and then forced to surrender. Now this is, we were at a museum the other day where this was remembered. And most, if you're not Danish or British, you never heard of this, except this is still a fresh memory, let's say, of the time when Copenhagen was partly destroyed. And famously, Lord Nelson, when he was told to stop the bombardment of the civilians in the city, he turned his blind eye and said, "I don't see the signal flag." Well, this is still, as I say, a feeling of injustice that carries on, but that's typical of every war. It leaves lingering angers. When we go into Copenhagen, as we sailed out, we're going to pass one of the forts that protect the harbor. Now it's being built out, and there's a lot of landfill and new development, and more windmills. So again, Denmark is investing so much to try to wean itself from petroleum because it has no resources. It has to buy everything. And now they're on getting natural gas from Norway in particular, but they're still investing to build these giant fields of windmills so that they can go green. We will be docking at one of the old docks where they've converted the warehouses into a promenade for our landing like we saw there. But if you walk down the course of the dock, you can come to this particular set of buildings. That's the royal landing for the royal yacht. And we saw the Norwegian King's yacht in front of our ship this morning or today. But occasionally you'll see the king and queen and the party come out for a visit on their little speedboat there. But Copenhagen, if you didn't get to stay there earlier on your way in, is a very walkable town. And we're going to be docking right up near the castle, the Castellet up here, and you can walk along the shore, then into the parks. And if maybe it's about a 10-20 minute walk down to the point where there's what they call the new harbor, and then the plazas and the shopping in the center of the town. So it's a very compact central city that's been fairly well preserved. So here's Newhaven, the old buildings now mostly lodging and restaurants and shops and things, and they have quite an array of old vessels, fishing vessels. And Pemba, who's that? That's your grandmother when she was a sailor. So this is the charm of Copenhagen. You know, it's one of the cleanest and lively cities, especially at night. A lot of music, and a lot of things to see. There's a whole area called Christiana across from that Newhaven, which is the old warehouse and factory area, and there was an area called La Christiana also that was where it was sort of a squatter's paradise where lots of dropouts and hippies and such refused to work or pay any taxes, and the Copenhagen government just let them have it there. Now they're redeveloping it, and they're having to pay some fare for their living with families for years, rent-free. This is where it is, Christiana Torv, which is the plaza. So that a lot of downtown Copenhagen is, again, you can get on a hop-on, hop-off ferry, or you can just walk, and now they have bridges. They have floating platform bathing, swimming areas even in the harbor. They've cleaned up the water so much, so like in Oslo, people actually go swimming right downtown anymore. Well, this is the castle where we are nearby at the dock, and this is still an active military base. After Lord Nelson bombarded it, they built it up and they made it stronger and put in bigger guns. There's the gunner of the day. And so you can walk around the perimeter, and the military base is still there. It's now the headquarters of military intelligence. I don't know why they told us that, but I guess they had no secret about it. And there are a lot of beautiful monuments for this. This is the dock where we will be staying, right up there, as you remember. And again, war memorials, World War I, World War II. I mean, Denmark was taken quickly by the Germans, and it did not offer any major resistance, but there was a lot of counter guerrilla warfare for a while and mining of the harbors. But Copenhagen did not suffer any great damage during the war, fortunately. And this is one of the main palaces, Amalienborg, which again, just further south, walking from the dock area. And so the current royal family still lives there, and you can go and see the changing of the guards. So this is the real live Disneyland show where they will march around and change the guards for you. So this is, again, on a nice day, if it's not too hot, you can walk all the way through here. And this is a tremendous church, the Marble Church, which is just at the center plaza near the Royal Palace, and has many figures from literature and the religious orders there. But mainly it's the tombs of the royal family. So that's open to the public. And then further downtown you get some of the commercial buildings, and another palace, the Christianborg Palace, is further downtown. That's now mostly government offices. And this is the Bourse, which is the first stock exchange in Europe. Very interesting roof and tower. These spiral towers are the signature of Copenhagen. And this church has you can go up and you can go to an observation deck about there. I don't think you can go up to the top anymore because it's a little dizzying. And further toward downtown, you get the commercial district. This is the Opera House and some other big traditional department stores and shops. The New Torget, the new plaza, that means. This is one of the classic hotels, the Hotel d'Angleterre, the English hotel. And then nearby, there's the Storget, which is the main pedestrian walking shopping district. And that's full of life. You can't really get there by car, because this is mostly a pedestrian area for quite a while. And so that you will see a lot of performers, and this is one of those give money and he will dance for you kind of a performer. But there's a lot of music in the streets. Copenhagen is quite famous for all of its jazz, especially, and a lot of international music festivals. But they play on the street, and it's a very lively city in many ways. Near the train station, there's the big City Hall Plaza. Now this is where the automobile and trains and transportation come in, and from there you have to walk around. It's also the center for a lot of protests, pro or negative, whatever the turn of the ages are here. And the other side, if you haven't been able to go there and a brief visit, is the great Tivoli Gardens. Again, in the central district with its own very large park and entranceway. And this was the first amusement park built in the world. So it's been copied in many places, and of course much more grand in other places, but it's still very classic, charming, different pavilions, exhibitions, rides, even things like this, which I still don't understand why anybody wants to do that. But and theater, dance, music, all those treasures. There's a big greenhouse for the winter time called the Winter Garden, and then a lake with a Chinese pavilion and rides. Now, there's a main entrance, but you have to pay extra retail for most things in there once you go in if you want to go for a ride on this pirate ship. But it's the sort of entertainment center for the whole family right there in central Copenhagen. Then when you get out of the central district, Copenhagen now spreads out with over 1 million people out into the suburbs and a lot of factories, a lot of industry. Here's the Carlsberg brewery, and then our larger city, which is now spread out to the other side of Zealand shore. And so every year I come here, there's always some eye-popping architecture that has come up. This happens to be the recycling center for the city. So Denmark has been trying to go to net zero waste at this point, where in some parts they have 14 different categories of recycling, so they're getting down to the last bits that they incinerate. And this is a power station right across the harbor from where we are. And there are a lot of new districts. I mean, there's not really much room to live in the city for the growing population. So there's a lot of new blocks like this, and this happens to be a Dali sculpture that they had realized there on the shore, not far from our dock. And a lot of new architecture, big residential towers out near the airport and the bigger industrial areas. And in the last decade, they built a brand new opera house over in Christian, across from the palaces. So this faces the Amalienborg Palace. So if you got to see the one in Oslo here, this one doesn't slide into the water. This one sort of hovers over the harbor and is as moody as the music they play. And that's one of the hop-on ferries you can ride around back and forth in the area. And they have more plans for more. I mean, Denmark is a fairly prosperous country, so it has, through its industry and economy, has afforded quite a bit of improvement in infrastructure, and also, like Norway, guaranteed education and medical and pension benefits for their population. There are only 6 million population in Denmark, but they say they punch above their weight economically. And so one of the projects that's going on now is to link Germany with Denmark to avoid all of the other islands and connections. And so this is a major project, actually the biggest infrastructure project in Europe currently being made across the Fehmarn Belt right here. Now the Kiel Canal comes right through there, so there's a lot of shipping that comes this way into the Hamburg and down the coast of France and Britain. But this will actually mean the rails and trains will be able to come right up to Copenhagen and across to Sweden and make the connections much easier. A couple of years ago, I came on a business trip. I bought a round-trip ticket by train from Amsterdam to Gothenburg, Sweden. But when I got to the German border, they said you have to take a local commuter train because they hadn't connected the trains yet. So I had to sleep on a bench for the night until the morning train came, and I could get here. And I changed 3 times on commuter trains to get to Copenhagen. So this is meant to solve that problem with this very large construction where they're building caisson-style boxes, which then they roll out into a barge and then they drop it into the seabed. And this is going to be 18 kilometers long of double automobile and high-speed rail. So this will make travel here so much easier. Well, I'll just give you a little bit of literature. Hans Christian Andersen and Søren Kierkegaard, for instance, were the still premier authors of Danish culture. And I particularly, I don't have a picture of Kierkegaard because he was a very sullen and a very shy person, but he wrote, "Most men pursue pleasure with such breathless haste that they hurry past it." And he was also engaged to a woman for 14 years, and when she said, I don't want to be your fiancé forever. If you don't marry me, I'm going to break it off. And he said, but dear, don't you realize anticipation is the best part of marriage? Well, she left him. But anyway, Hans Christian Andersen was, of course, the fairy tale author, and most famously the story of the Little Mermaid. And if you didn't see the famous statue of her just down the dock, again, short walk from our ship, she's been there for about 100 years as the kind of the mascot and the emblem of the city. Her own the story, though, is much more complicated, because she was a young mermaid who wanted to go on a ship to meet the sailor, and she left her sisters who urged her not to go, and she ended up being kidnapped by the ship and turned into a full female, and then she had to go home, where she finally forlornly sat on a rock in the harbor since then. This statue has been stolen so many times that they now have 24-hour watch on it. It seems to be a contest in Copenhagen, who can steal the mermaid for the day. Well, I'll leave you with a couple of sea quotes here. First of all, from the writer, the Danish writer Inge Brixet, better known as Isaac Dennison, who wrote, the care for anything is salt water, either sweat, tears, or sea. And the heart is but the beach beside the sea that is the world. That's a Chinese proverb. And there's magic in the distance where the sea line meets the sky. And this was the saying of Disraeli, I saw more than I remember, but I now remember more than I saw. So I wish you have had a great voyage on the ship, and that you'll take home good memories, and we hope to see you out here again on Silver Sea. Thank you very much, and bon voyage. Okay.